The First World War continues to remind us of the disorder and instability to European life after 1918, an instability that eventually led to the outbreak of an even more deadly war just over 2 decades later.
So as in Canada and other parts of the world, China was in many ways caught up in the same moment of radicalization and radical rethinking. But the most direct impact World War I had on China was the May 4th movement. And this movement was a result of the Treaty of Versailles. And one of the terms of the treaty was that the territory in northern China, the territory of Shandong, which the Germans had occupied, would not be returned to China, rather it would be given to Japan. And this was largely a result of secret treaties that the Chinese people themselves and even people in the Chinese government were not all aware of. The result of a secret treaty between Great Britain, Italy, France, and Japan at an earlier moment in the war in January of 1917. But Duan Shi-rui, in an effort to consolidate his power in China, secretly made an agreement with the Japanese in September of 1917 where he said, if you loan me money to strengthen my army, I will let you have free reign in Shandong. So the 5 Chinese diplomats who went to negotiate the Treaty of Versailles had no knowledge of this secret treaty. But when news reached China, and particularly very nationalist-minded students at Beijing University, they were absolutely outraged. So this protest movement began to gain force, and this force culminated on May 4th. 3,000 students gathered from Beijing. Ultimately, there were no deaths. This was not a violent protest, but it was one that clearly roused national consciousness about this issue. Mao Zedong was not directly involved in the May 4th movement, but he was certainly inspired by it. And the Chinese Communist Party will be founded in 1921, and very much on the heels of the quest for this new sense of national power.
In World War I, the Jews were very much divided. That is, they were typically loyal to the states or empires in which they lived. That was not what was often expected of them, however, and this led to a number of problems. Some called for Jews to have the rights to their own culture where they live. We call that diaspora nationalism. So that, let's say, the Russian Empire should be reconstituted as a federation of nationalities, of which the Jews are but one. And of course, there's Zionism, which the main goal was for Jewish sovereignty. Jewish political groups sent delegates to Paris for the peace negotiations, and they represented the entire ideological spectrum, from those who were opponents of Jewish nationalism, to Zionists, to diaspora nationalists, and all sorts of gradations in between. The Balfour Declaration in 1917 gives a solidity, a foundation to the Zionist movement that it was lacking up to this point. From a Jewish perspective, it seems like politically the doors are wide open. The idea of reconstituting Eastern Europe as states of nationalities is a possibility. The idea of Jews having national autonomy in smaller ethnic nation states like Poland and Lithuania is a possibility. The idea of Jews having a sovereign nation state in the Middle East, in Israel, is a possibility. So it seems like out of the suffering of World War I, something good came out of it. The 20s and 30s revealed that the situation was not going to be so. Or at least in 1918, 1919, there was tremendous optimism.
World War I is the most important concentrated event in shaping the modern Middle East. The British sought to make agreements with anybody to secure some kind of an advantage in the war. The British promised Sharif Hussein of Mecca that if he were to launch a rebellion against the Ottomans, that they would grant him an independent Arab kingdom in Iraq and Greater Syria. In addition to that, they had already promised the Zionist organization that Palestine would become a Jewish state. Another promise was made to the Saudi family. If they sided with the British, they would assist them in the formation of a kingdom. Ultimately, what happened at the end of the war was that the Middle East, in fact, was divided between the French and the English, and came to be ruled almost as colonies through the logic of right of conquest. The Arabs were able to establish a state in Syria, in Damascus. The French were given the right to go in, bombard this newly established kingdom, and take it over as a colony. Now, this left a very bitter taste in the mouth of those who had aspired to form a unified Arab country, and this feeling that the West is always out to get us, always interested in protecting the petroleum, has never left the mind of Arab politicians.
After the war, there was a profound sense of loss, a loss of innocence. But the problems went deeper than that, into the very psyches of the men who were returning from the front. What we would now call post-traumatic stress disorder, they called it the 1,000-yard stare. The men who were seen to be suffering from shell shock, and their numbers grew as the intensity of the battles increased, were more likely to be seen as malingerers, as emotionally defective in some way. And so their solution became send them back into battle as quickly as possible, and hopefully that'll make men out of them. Now, this approach continued into the peace. Indeed, it continued well into the Depression. Men continued to experience delayed stress responses, and they continued to petition the Military Pensions Board for some form of assistance. The problem was this would create an increasing financial burden on the federal government, which in turn would necessitate the continuation of income tax as a regular feature of federal financing.
You know, for us today, income tax is just something we have to do. But it didn't exist before 1917. The 1917 is introduced as a temporary measure to pay for the war. During the war, there were more than 600,000 men under arms. And they're being paid $1.10 a day. So who's going to pay for that, right? So initially it's war bonds, but you know that can only go so far because the Canadian government has to pay that back, right? So where's that money going to come from? Well, it's going to come from taxes. And so the income tax is instituted.
Canada lost almost an entire generation of young men. 1 in every 10 Canadian men who served died. 1 in every 4 Newfoundlanders who served died.
It's husbands, it's sons, it's fathers. If you go across the country today, if you're in Wolfville, Nova Scotia, if you're in Toronto, if you're in Vancouver, you know, if you're in Thamesville, Ontario, the first thing you're going to notice is that war memorial, right? And that war memorial, every village in this country built in the 1920s to remember their people, right? Their men who had lost, because it's a shared loss. So I think it's that shared sense of bereavement which unites people in a way which has never had happened in Canadian history before.